for this first in a series of lectures by Dr. Wilfried Edener. My name is Anderson, and in Scandinavian circles that doesn't mean a thing. That's not a name, that's just a classification. So I have to identify myself as being the president of Augsburg College, and I'm very happy for the opportunity to welcome Dr. Edener and you to this series. I was listening to my car radio coming over, and there was a squib there by the announcer regarding a program tomorrow, the regular series that dear Abby has. And I heard that one of the questions that she will answer will be that put by a mother who complains that her husband will not allow the child in the family to study a foreign language. Now, how dear Abby handles that will depend upon, well, we'll find out if we are tuned in at the right time. But I'm sure that there's no need to convince this particular audience of the importance of the study of foreign languages. And it is because we share that sense of the importance of the teaching of modern languages in today's world that we felt exceedingly fortunate to have Dr. Edener in our midst as colleges in the Twin City area to observe what we are doing and to tell us from his experience and vantage point how it seems to him. I'm sure that this will be a very fruitful series. I, for one, believe very sincerely in the important place of modern languages in the curriculum of a liberal arts college. I'm sure that the reasons that I have are perhaps the reasons that Dr. Edener has for this emphasis. I believe that foreign languages or modern languages expand the horizons of the individual who gets involved with them. I believe that in this cosmopolitan age it is necessary to be able to understand people of other lands and cultures. And of course, if we are going to expand the number who go on into graduate study, it is also going to be exceedingly important that this particular discipline have a strong emphasis. I couldn't help but think, as I heard also on the radio coming over, of President Johnson's appearance before the statue of Lincoln today, since this is Lincoln's birthday, of how Lincoln was concerned about a divided nation and the anguish that he went through because of that division. And we live in a divided world, and certainly what applies to a nation applies also to the world. And therefore, even this concern for understanding the language of others may help in some measure to breach the chasms and bring the parts of this divided and fractured world together. Let us hope that this can serve also this purpose. And so I'm very happy to present to this group Dr. Wilfried Edener, whose credentials you have already seen, and who has, I think, fitted very well into our Midwestern scene, possibly because of his very long acquaintance with Main Street through his interest in Sinclair Lewis. But it's been a real joy and a privilege to have Dr. Edener and his family in our midst here at Augsburg, and I know the other colleges that are along on this program have felt the same way. So I'll turn the balance of the evening over to him for his lecture and for the questions that you may wish to put to him. Dr. Edener.
Thank you very much, President Anderson, for this very friendly introduction. You have hit the keynote of what I am planning to say, and your speaking of my background, of course, has reminded me of a fascinating definition of an expert that I heard a few days ago. An expert, it was said, is an SOB from out of town with slides. This definition is not correct in my case, of course. I haven't brought any slides. Not today, anyhow. What I have brought is merely a big bag full of questions. Questions about the problems that beset all of us as we go about this business of teaching foreign languages. Questions which indeed we all have been grappling with for a long time, and to which we have tried to find the best possible answers. These answers have been different at different times and with different individuals. They have varied from classroom to classroom and from one nation to the other. Indeed, so radically different have they become in various countries in past decades of mutual isolation and even estrangement, that entirely different traditions and overall situations could establish themselves, cleavages which of course had a tendency to cause more and more mutual misunderstanding and thus to widen the comprehensibility gap between your activities and ours, between European countries and America. In a century which is marked by an advance in technology that throws us closer and closer together, this situation of mutual misunderstanding among large sections of the population of this world cannot be put up with any longer, and we know it. It is one of the most encouraging developments since the end of World War II that the various exchange programs between different countries should have received ever-increasing support by governments and by individuals. Exchanges between the United States and European countries have often been hampered by the long distance across the Atlantic and by the resulting high expenses involved. But as you all know, great efforts have been made throughout the years to overcome these difficulties, and the resulting contacts between students and teachers of this country and Europeans, and indeed, of course, people of other continents, have attached permanent glory not only to the name of Senator Fulbright, but indeed to all the responsible agencies of and within the federal government and all the other governments concerned. The fact that among these exchange programs, a special program for foreign language curriculum consultants was started 4 years ago seems to indicate that the federal government has acknowledged the growing need for some reintegration of American and European foreign language teaching traditions. And indeed, the demand for answering this need seems to be imperative. For if we fail to succeed in language communication, we shall fail in everything else. And who could be considered responsible for failing to achieve this communication if we aren't, as foreign language teachers? The ways and methods, however, by which we have tried to achieve communication are quite different from each other, so different, in fact, that almost any exchange of ideas about these ways and methods must almost automatically lead toward a somewhat better realization of what the other side are doing, and hopefully to an understanding of why they are doing it. The attempt to understand how these different approaches to foreign language learning and foreign language teaching came about will be the subject of my second talk a week from tonight. And I trust that by understanding how that regrettable cleavage came about in the past, we will be that much better able to overcome this cleavage now and to avoid similar disjunction in the future. Tonight, I suggest we try to lay a foundation for our future discussions of foreign language learning by determining the aims and purposes of this particular brand of learning. This, of course, is just one of the questions that has been answered in so many different ways at different times and in different countries. As I see my function here, I think I shall try to present the answers commonly given to this question in my home country, and to compare these answers with those I have encountered here. In doing so, I want to assure you that I do not feel that we have all the know-how, and that I do not mean to suggest that you should be expected to adopt all that I will present tonight and in my remaining talks. As a matter of fact, I'm sure that if you were to do that, the results would be perfectly disastrous. Our concepts and our practices are closely related to our background and to our situation, and it would be impossible simply to engraft them upon an entirely different background and situation here. As a matter of fact, this is my biggest problem in talking to you here about our practices. We do or believe certain things, X, Y, because they relate to certain elements A, B, C, D, and E of the general social background and of the ethical context of our way of life, of our Weltanschauung. Thus, as I speak to you about our activities or opinions, X, Y, I should actually relate them to these background elements, A, B, C, D, E, in order to help you understand why we do X, Y. If I did that, however, this would become a full-term course rather than a series of 5 lectures. I shall therefore have to limit myself to short remarks about those background elements. Indeed, I shall have to translate, not so much from the German into the English language, but rather from European concepts into American concepts. What I do hope, though, is that through my presentation of these concepts to you, you will not only gain a better understanding of our approaches, but possibly also feel challenged to rethink some of your attitudes and to try out some of the suggestions which I hope to be able to make. Let me repeat them, the main question for tonight. Why should we, and especially why should Americans, bother to learn foreign languages? One of the stock answers that has often been given, both at home and over here, is that you acquire the ability to handle an additional means of communication, that is, the ability to communicate with more people. Before we go into the question of just how convincing this answer may be for somebody who may be afraid of the difficulties of foreign language learning, let us decide first of all what we mean by communicating with other people. I must admit that in past decades, our foreign language teaching was a bit one-sided in giving somewhat more emphasis to the reading and writing skills than to listening and speaking. I think there was a certain justification for this unbalance in the fact that most international and interlingual communication occurred in this form, that is, as writing and as reading. What is changing this attitude today is the effect brought about by the increasing availability of convenient means of transportation at reasonable rates. It has become a trite truism to say that in our time more people can travel to more foreign countries within shorter times than at any other period in history. Foreign language teaching in Europe is aware of the challenge of this new situation, and we meet this challenge by aiming at a more balanced curriculum. New ways of using the language labs, which are being installed in increasing numbers in our schools, are being studied right now. We are not, however, planning to replace one bias by another. We do not want to substitute one kind of unbalance for another. We do not want to become too prejudiced in favor of audiolingualism, after having been somewhat prejudiced in favor of graphism. For one thing, letters will still have to be written in foreign languages and even to be translated from one language into the other. And we will still want to read lots of foreign language literature, from research reports to modern novels, drama, and poetry. For reasons which I will have to explain a week from tonight, we have become rather wary of revolutions in modernizing our teaching methods. Instead, we believe in organic growth and in gradual but continuous evolution of improving methods and approaches. While we do try, then, to upgrade our program by devoting more effort to teaching the oral skills, I do not expect that we will therefore completely abandon at any level of instruction the teaching of reading and writing the foreign languages. In other words, we are not planning to become pure audiolinguists, if there is such a thing. In this, we also manifest our conviction that the learning of a foreign language by a student at school is a process which is quite different from the learning of a mother tongue by an infant, and by the same token, entirely different too from the phylogenesis of language, that is, from the way in which language as such develops. I shall have to return to this point in my next two talks. There's just one more fact that I should like to mention at this point. Since about the turn of the century, the teaching of the audiolingual skills has never been as completely absent from our curricula as I am told it was in this country until about 25 years ago. In this rather long tradition of including at least a certain amount of oral training at all levels, we have wound up with a little more emphasis on one aspect of the speaking skill, which doesn't seem to be getting quite as universal attention under the audiolingual method as I have encountered it here. I'm referring to the necessity of correct intonation and rhythm. For you may have a completely correct pronunciation of English or of any other foreign language. You may be able to rattle off dozens of patterns. If you don't master the correct rhythm and intonation, you will be felt to have a terrible accent. Of course, I could do that in German too. And one trouble about intonation and rhythm is that while most of the time we are much less conscious of these aspects of a good pronunciation, we react much more strongly to faulty intonation and rhythm than we do to other kinds of mistakes. It is most often to faulty intonation and rhythm that we are actually referring when we complain of foreigners' strange ways, or of their overbearing tone, or of their insulting aggressiveness. And these are the things we are much less ready to make allowance for than we would make for individual mistakes in pronunciation or in vocabulary. Just listen and you'll have an example. This afternoon I made a phone call and I was trying to be very clear because it was important for me. It was about taxes. And trying to be so clear, I seem to have got into a wrong intonation. And this lady said at the end of the telephone line, "Why are you so excited?" Well, I didn't feel excited at all, except that I was trying to make things clear. But so you see, I'm a living example for what I'm saying. Intonation, of course, is closely connected with contextualism. And since contextualism is one of the essential aspects of the so-called active method, I will be coming back to this subject in my third talk. I did want to mention correct intonation and rhythm tonight, though, as an important objective in modern foreign language teaching, especially since I feel that my task here is not to give a complete list of all the objectives of foreign language teaching, but rather to stress those aspects in which I feel your tradition may differ from ours, and in which we can therefore learn most from each other. My experience of foreign language teaching in this country, of course, is very limited, but I can only try and do my best. As for the argument that one of our purposes in teaching a foreign language is to help the student to acquire a certain degree of skill in the various communication arts in the foreign language, I think we all, as foreign language teachers, would agree to such a proposition, even if we may disagree about the relative amount of energy to be spent on the various communication skills. We all know, however, that this argument has not always carried over the weight of conviction which it was meant to convey to non-language teachers. Too often we have heard objections like these: "I'm not going to have any use for that additional ability of communication. Let those who come to our country learn our language first. We aren't going to learn their languages. Even if we go to their countries, there's usually somebody around who knows enough English anyway. And I'm not thinking of going abroad anyhow." The disturbing thing is that there is some sense in such attitudes and statements, and especially that they certainly used to represent common sense in former periods, especially in this huge country. And I'm European enough in my thinking to realize how strong the impact of history, of the past, of traditions is on contemporary attitudes and contemporary opinion. We all pride ourselves on being, each of us, a Homo sapiens. But reason most certainly is not the only factor that determines our behavior. And once a generally accepted opinion and attitude has established itself, even a Russian Sputnik will not suffice to overturn it completely in one day, or in 10 years for that matter, even if it may have some effect. And so we see those traditional objections still deviate many from foreign language learning, even against the evidence of thousands and thousands of young Americans who are tonight stationed in foreign countries and exposed to foreign languages which they may never have expected to have anything to do with in all their lives. I must tell you that it is a pathetic thing to see the ghetto situation in which I guess almost all of them live there. In Fürth, my own hometown in Germany, a twin city of Nuremberg, there is quite a big US garrison. And the only thing these pitiable and linguistically isolated GIs get outside their military environment is booze, in joints where indeed they are among themselves again. And their trouble is not so much that they don't know a foreign language. They could learn it. Their trouble is that they don't care to. Foreign language learning has never been introduced into their learning experience as a natural and matter-of-fact part of their education in a modern world. Actually, the great necessity for this country and for my own appears to be not so much that as many students as possible should be exposed willy-nilly to some foreign language, but rather that their readiness to study a foreign language should come to be considered as a natural and even necessary corollary of living in this multilingual and constantly shrinking modern world of ours. Fortunately, time seems to be working in favor of the idea of foreign language learning in America. This country is getting to be more and more closely associated with the rest of the world. I had a personal experience of that economic tie-up of the United States with the rest of the world a few days ago, when I had to send an Italian color film that I had bought before I came over here back to Hamburg, Germany, to get it developed. You know whose laboratories developed the film for me there? 3M. I must say this for the mail services, though, that I got that film back in a matter of just a few days, almost as quick, in fact, as if I had mailed the film from Minneapolis to St. Paul and back. For many Europeans, of course, it would appear almost ridiculous even to ask the question why we should learn foreign languages, because mastering foreign languages is such a vital necessity for them. How could peoples like the Danish or the Dutch, for example, survive if a great proportion of the population did not at least master one foreign language? Indeed, not bilingualism, but trilingualism is the rule among such smaller language groups, and as I have said, it is a matter of national survival for them. This economical and political necessity makes foreign language studying imperative even for nations which would be very surprised to find themselves grouped among the small nations, for example, my own Germany, and even France. I understand that many Americans, however, are not yet wholly aware of any such necessity as far as this country is concerned. Living in one of the economically and politically most powerful nations must, of course, make it hard to believe in a linguistic dependency upon others. Still, I believe that many will realize on second thought that, for example, American products stand a much better chance of being sold in foreign markets if they are generously advertised in the local idiom. And then, of course, it has been claimed that even world history might have taken different turns if Americans had been able to understand Japanese more readily prior to Pearl Harbor and indeed prior to Hiroshima, and if they had been able to read existing Russian reports prior to the Sputnik surprise. When this national and economic interest boils down to the level of the individual potential foreign language student, it means that by learning more languages, he will be earning more money later. This is a valid argument, I think, and it will become more and more convincing too. By the way, I think I should mention at this point that Mr. Frank Gritner, the foreign language consultant in the Wisconsin State Department of Education, has prepared an excellent taped lecture with slides on this very subject. Why should you learn a foreign language? In this lecture, which is primarily aiming at potential foreign language students, Mr. Gritner demonstrates at length these practical advantages of foreign language learning. I understand that a complete copy of that talk set has been deposited with Mr. Percy Fearing, foreign language consultant of the Minnesota State Department of Education, and that it could be borrowed from him to use in your own schools. I will therefore not go any further into these practical aspects of foreign language learning. Mr. Gritner, I should mention, does not limit his argument to presenting this practical point of view. And indeed, as a teacher rooted in the cultural heritage of Europe, I should be very unhappy if this utilitarian argument were the only one by which we could defend our raison d'être as foreign language teachers. Good education, we feel, is more than a utilitarian acquisition of technical skills, whatever the subject may be. It can and should never be our purpose to produce what has been termed competent barbarians. This is to say that the practical mastery of the rudiments of a foreign language should never be merely an end in itself, whether you think of elementary school or of colleges. And I think we all, as foreign language teachers, will agree that any foreign language course should at least aim at a second purpose, at a comprehension of the culture of a society whose language we study. The only trouble I would find with such a consensus would be the vagueness of the term culture. And you are all aware of how glittering a term it is, with all the various meanings that have attached themselves to this term, from the art of tilling the soil to a growth of the bacteria or fungi in a nutrient medium. While I'm sure that we will gladly abandon the study of this last mentioned type of culture to the biologist, there remains, even without that, enough variety attached to the term culture to create much confusion. Have we taught any culture when we tell the students that there are as many kinds of cheese in France as there are days in the year? Or when we tell them that feather quilts or huge soft feather pillows are used for bed covers in Germany, and a good thing they are too. I'm not suggesting that we should ignore such peculiarities in our foreign language courses, but I think we should keep in mind that our introduction of foreign culture must go several levels above and beyond this kind of information. And yet, don't let's underestimate the potential importance of such apparently insignificant details. Let's take an example. What do you do with your hands when you meet people or when you talk with them? I had a little experience along these lines the other day over in my office here at Augsburg College, when my wife, who had been using our car, came to pick me up. Quite habitually and casually we shook hands, and we got a big stare of surprise from one of the very friendly ladies there who happened to be present. She just couldn't see why we should have been shaking hands. And we, of course, felt that it was the only natural and appropriate thing to be doing there. Well, that American lady's surprise, of course, didn't hurt anybody. But then I remember what happened a few days after I had returned home after my first stay in this country as a student. I was invited to report about my experiences in a young people's club. After a while, those young people began to get very restless and to laugh, rather pointlessly, I felt. And I was quite embarrassed after a while, until my sister, who happened to be there, called to me, "Why don't you take your hands out of your pockets for a change?" Now that explained everything to me, of course. I knew, as a German, that I was doing one of two things by putting my hands in my pockets in front of an audience. I was either demonstrating how very boorish and ill-mannered I was, or I was being deliberately rude, discourteous, and insulting by displaying such a bad behavior intentionally. So I apologized, trying to explain, and even while I was doing so, I got my next big laugh, for there I was slipping my hand right back into my pocket without my being aware of it. I've never forgotten this little embarrassment, for it taught me how incredibly easy it is for anyone to be misunderstood in a foreign country and to have his behavior misinterpreted. What made the difference in this case was, of course, that we believe in our country, and in others as well, that a certain amount of formalized civility is necessary as the grease which helps to keep the wheels of society going without too much friction, as somebody has put it. I am aware that in this country the theory is that informality does the job better. Unfortunately, we haven't got the time now to go into the respective merits of formalism versus informality. My point here is that as foreign language teachers, we must be aware of such differences in attitudes, aware of other nations' values differing from those which happen to be the standard values of the student's home country and home society. And we absolutely must present these national and cultural peculiarities to our students as values. And we mustn't never merely condescend to mention these things as funny oddities which those people really ought to get rid of, for they won't. Not for us, anyhow. This, of course, is the point where the foreign language teacher must proceed from the apparently insignificant factual information about the foreign country to an intelligent and sympathetic interpretation of this factual information. Let me stress this once more. We, as foreign language teachers, must not only present factual information about the peculiarities of a foreign nation, but it is absolutely necessary that we add to this information an intelligent and sympathetic interpretation of this factual information. We must tell the student why people behave differently in the other country, how they feel about their behavior, and how they would feel about ours. I wouldn't even hesitate to say that we must make our students feel that the foreign nation's way of life is more acceptable, more enjoyable even, more reasonable perhaps than our own, as long as we speak the foreign language, at least. And our obligation as foreign language teachers goes even beyond that. It is not enough that we help our students to understand one foreign country's peculiarities. We must inculcate upon their minds, as a new but indeed fundamental attitude, a very general, open-minded readiness to discover any other nation's peculiarities, and a corresponding willingness to adopt a sympathetic understanding of such divergent attitudes. Indeed, I believe that such an attitude, once it has been acquired by a student, could be transferred even to living in one's own native society, where, after all, we must often make certain allowances for somewhat, even if not basically, divergent views of other people too. Foreign language teaching can be an education of character towards tolerance in general. This means that in order to furnish this kind of teaching, we ourselves, as foreign language teachers, must have succeeded not only in tolerating, but in understanding and appreciating the cultural peculiarities of at least one foreign nation in the same way in which these idiosyncrasies are understood and appreciated by the civilized natives of that country. We must be able to reproduce that nation's image of itself in the minds of our pupils. And in order to be able to do that, we must have acquired, as it were, a second personality. That kind of a personality which could find its natural expression in the foreign language and in the cultural background which that language represents. But I'm afraid I'm getting way ahead of my schedule now. I'm supposed to be talking about the training of foreign language teachers 4 weeks from tonight. Let me give you a rather striking illustration, though, of the importance of this cultural understanding. A few years ago, an ambassador from a great nation, I could identify both of them, but I won't, was appointed his country's ambassador to my country. As he presented his credentials to our president, he kept one of his hands in his pocket, and he was photographed in this posture. Now, in the light of what I told you a moment ago, you can perhaps imagine what a sensation that photograph created. I am positive that this picture became one of the most widely publicized photographs that year in Germany. I needn't tell you what happens when the press get hold of a genuine sensation, and this most certainly was a genuine sensation. There was a considerable commotion all over the country, and the question was very seriously debated: was this ambassador consciously trying to insult our president and thus our whole nation? If so, he succeeded in doing so very efficiently. Those who really understood, of course, were ready to admit, once this conscious insult theory had been abandoned, that what had really happened was that a very important person had for a while forgotten to remember what it meant to be living abroad in an official function. An unfortunate lapsus, certainly, and no more than that, except for the regrettable result that in many less broad-minded people's minds, this man had after all tarnished the image of his home country by making them feel about this way: well, after all, everybody knows that they don't know how to behave in that country anyhow, so what can you expect? And who was to be blamed? The man who trained this ambassador, I guess. His foreign language teacher. He may have taught him the foreign language beautifully, but he apparently had failed to warn him sufficiently of the dangers of these seemingly insignificant little details. Or, to put it into more sophisticated terms, he didn't make him sufficiently aware of the significance of the extralingual elements of communication. I feel very strongly about this responsibility of the foreign language teacher to keep in mind these frightful consequences of possible misunderstandings of these extralingual elements of communication. And I feel quite strongly about the foreign language teacher's responsibility to help his students to avoid such misunderstandings. Among the slides illustrating Mr. Gridner's lecture, there is one that shows a picture of the ugly American. I carry in my mind a very clear image of the abominable German tourist, a species which is apt to behave outrageously, especially when it goes traveling and living abroad gregariously. Ask Italians from near the Adriatic about this species, and they will know what I mean. In my life, I have met several examples of both these species. And I think the two species have a few things in common. They are essentially harmless and well-meaning. but they are at the same time either ignorant or oblivious of the fact that everybody in this world doesn't feel exactly the way they do. Every once in a while, therefore, especially when they go abroad, they run into unpleasant reactions which they do not even understand. And they are not aware that it was their own lack of sympathetic understanding which has provoked those unpleasant reactions. And since they have also this in common, that they both want to be loved by the rest of the world, and that both of them sometimes feel that this love can be acquired by means of financial support, and that this monetary aid is a sufficient substitute for a patient and painstaking effort to arrive at a sympathetic understanding of how the other nations feel, they will begin to feel sorry for themselves and to complain of the ingratitude of the world and be very self-righteous in general and react accordingly and get results accordingly, and so on and so on. The teaching of foreign languages, I was saying, must include instruction about significant aspects of the foreign way of life and about the significant attitudes which they represent. This is one kind of teaching which nobody can offer the student as well and as easily and as naturally as the foreign language teacher can. But let me emphasize here that an understanding of such basic attitudes and basic assumptions will not just happen as a fortuitous byproduct of whatever we may decide to do in the classroom. None of our objectives will just happen. We, as foreign language teachers, must make very conscious efforts to help our students to understand such attitudes. Not that I would suggest that you go to your classroom tomorrow and say, all right, we'll have a unit on basic attitudes today, and next week's test will be about how much you can enjoy the Austrian way of life. There are much more ingenious, and I was almost going to say much more insidious, ways of attaining this purpose. Let yourself go off on a tangent every once in a while when the situation offers itself. Forget about the curriculum and the patterns and indulge in merely talking for a while and telling your students about your personal memories of experiences with people in that country. Your students will love it, especially because they'll believe that you are unconsciously wasting your teaching time, and so they'll have a lot less work to review. But however casual your digression may be, however accidentally you may have decided in the individual instance to indulge in such a digression, this digression should basically be the result of your conscious determination to help your students to understand not only the words and patterns of the language, but also the quality of life that is expressing itself in these words and patterns. And then if you conclude your digression with a casual remark to your students that, of course, you don't need to remember all that for your test, you may just as well forget these things right now, then you have got them in most cases and you've achieved your purpose. Don't we all remember from our own school days that those were the moments we appreciated most and which made us feel we were getting much more real understanding than in much of the regular learning? Such an investment of time will finally pay off in dividends of motivation. Only make sure the high school principal isn't around the corner. He might feel you are wasting your teaching time too, especially if he's not in foreign languages himself. In our efforts to introduce our students to an understanding of foreign ways of life, we aim primarily at the comprehension of present-day situations. But I have already mentioned that we believe that in order to really understand contemporary situations, we must have a close look at past developments too. For example, you cannot understand procedures in the House of Parliament in London, for example, if you don't know about a certain number of past events which contributed to the establishing of those ceremonies. You cannot hope ever to come close to any understanding of de Gaulle, nor of the reactions of the French to their president, if you have never heard about the dramatic life story of Joan of Arc, and about the equally dramatic 1958 crisis of French national politics. And of course, that's history too. And to mention just one more example, you cannot understand, as a foreigner, let us say, the religious scene in the United States today if you don't go back as far as to the 2 or possibly 3 major European Reformation movements in the 16th century and afterwards. In fact, so much do we believe in the value of history as the most effective approach to understanding the American mind, or the French mind, or the British mind, or the Western mind, that we will use some historical material, even if it is apt to interfere with a student's ability to master the contemporary form of the foreign language. For example, we study at least some passages of Shakespearean plays in the original text in the 6th or 8th year, that is to say, in the last year but one, of an English foreign language course sequence at our gymnasium. The harm which is doubtlessly done to the student's ability of handling modern English can and will rather easily be overcome by a subsequent practice of the modern idiom, whereas the harm done by ignoring such essential elements of the cultural heritage of Britain would not only be very unlikely ever to be repaired in the student's later experience, but would probably even limit his understanding of frequent allusions in the foreign language. Better understanding, then, is what foreign language teaching is all about. Better understanding on various levels of understanding. Better understanding, plus more skill, of course, on the level of communication. Better understanding on the level of cultural insight. And finally, better understanding on the level of clearer thinking in general. And thus, we face the third major purpose of foreign language teaching that I wish to speak about tonight: helping the student to clarify his thinking. Again, I wish to emphasize that this clarification of thinking is not something that will simply happen automatically as we teach foreign language. It is an end which can be achieved only if we as teachers are good enough to help our students achieve it. How then do I suggest we can help our students to clarify their thinking in the course of learning a foreign language? Before I answer this question, let's have a look at what modern linguistics tells us language really is and what it is not. Language is not a set of words referring immediately to objects and actions, to life and to the world as such. Rather, language is a set of speech habits expressing the subjective approach of a people or of a group of people to reality. A set of speech habits expressing a certain image of the world, a Weltanschauung. Now, psychologists tell us that if we practice one way of doing things long enough, we will begin to assume that this is the only way, or the only right way of looking at things, that any other way is wrong, or odd, or backward, or funny. We can, of course, see the close parallel between the cultural background that we talked about a moment ago and language itself. Applying that general psychological insight to language, this means that if we know only our mother tongue, we are unaware of the fact that other people see the world and see life as it objectively is in a manner that may be quite different from our own. When, however, a student begins learning a foreign language, he will discover words and structures which couldn't simply be superimposed on those in his mother tongue. in becoming aware of the differences, he can integrate this new awareness into his previous understanding of reality and thus improve and refine his understanding of life. Examples will again illustrate what I mean. When we teach German, for example, we can quite easily demonstrate that the concept underlying the short English word where is not simple, but quite complex. Witness the two German equivalents of where do you sit, wo sitzt du, and where do you go, wohin gehst du. Other concepts that can be clarified by the comparison of German structures with the student's native English are those of relations between various objects and or actions. In English, you can walk in the street and children can play in the fields, which makes the street and the fields three-dimensional spaces. Whereas Germans can only auf der Straße gehen, auf den Feldern spielen, walk on the street, play on the fields, which clearly reflects our mental image of the street and of the fields as two-dimensional planes. The difference between in the street and auf der Straße really is not in the prepositions, but in the different concepts. The different prepositions merely express the resulting difference in the relations between those concepts. They have a bad reputation, these prepositions, don't they? And often it is claimed that you can master them only by mechanical memorization. This may be true of some of them. In some cases, however, they give you surprising insights once you begin looking at them more carefully. And this is true not only of prepositions. Take a word like reality. Any dictionary will tell you that its German equivalent is Wirklichkeit. And yet, to translate Wirklichkeit into English by reality is to spoil the whole essential concept of Wirklichkeit. Wirklichkeit, which is derived from the verb wirken, to work, to act, really refers to the way things work, the way this world lives and changes and behaves. It is an essentially dynamic concept, whereas the word reality, which stems from the Latin word for thing, res, is entirely static. The student who has been made aware of such differences has thereby been given the opportunity to decide which of the two aspects he is actually thinking of, how he understands this world, as a dynamic or as a static phenomenon. A choice which otherwise might never have presented itself to him except possibly in a course in philosophy. To be sure, this kind of understanding cannot be achieved in a 2-year course. And I'm happy to see that efforts are underway to give more and more children the chance to begin foreign language learning early enough to allow them ample time for acquiring various new kinds of awareness. Again, even when we have enough time, we'll of course not devote complete course sequences to this kind of understanding, but we will occasionally introduce examples of it into our normal courses whenever the opportunity offers itself. And we will feel that we have done enough of this when we have made our students aware of the potentialities of foreign language learning, and when we have aroused their curiosity enough to do some exploring along these lines on their own. If then we learn and teach foreign languages in a meaningful way, that is to say, not only mechanically and unthinkingly, but rather in view of profiting by the dissimilar image of the world expressed in a foreign language, then we can experience new and clearer ways of looking at the world ourselves. Our life becomes that much richer, that much more meaningful. We acquire that much more personality. we are more broad-minded, more of what you can indeed call human beings. And this, I feel, is possibly the highest among the potential achievements of foreign language teaching, the greatest among the various challenges that the foreign language teacher can meet. I think I've heard it said in this country that learning foreign languages is in the national interest. If by learning foreign languages we mean acquiring the ability and the willingness to communicate with other nations and to understand them, to understand not only what they explicitly mean to say, but also to understand what they feel they don't even need to say, and clearly to understand what their language makes them say. If thus finally our purpose in teaching foreign languages is to understand both ourselves and the rest of the world better, then I believe there are few things which could be considered as more important in this whole world of ours in the last third of the 20th century. I thank you very much for your patient attention.